Today is the 9th of September, 2014, and this is episode 143. This program is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Cryptocurrency is new, highly experimental, and we're not experts, just obsessed companions walking the road towards a more peer-to-peer future. Welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show about the ideas, people, and projects building the digital economy and the future of money. My name is Adam B. Levine, and today we're catching up on conferences, and it's a long one. We kick things off at PorcFest 2014. Stephanie moderates a wide-ranging Women in Bitcoin panel featuring Paige Peterson, MK Lords, Tatiana Moroz, and Lynn Ulbricht. This panel occupies the first half of the show. Then, editor-in-chief of American Banker Mark Hochstein recently caught up with Charlie Shrem on stage at their first cryptocurrency event in New York. They talk felonies, assumptions, and the burden of compliance on founder-dependent startups. And finally, we take a step back from the obviously cryptocurrency and think a little different. At yesterday's TechCrunch Disrupt, there was an obvious point of excitement about Braintree and thus PayPal's upcoming acceptance of Bitcoin. But there was another talk you might not have heard about that struck a chord with me. If all you want is Bitcoin, don't listen to the final conversation between E.V. Williams, Walter Isaacson, as moderated by Matthew Panzarino. But you should. Like I said, big schedule. Let's hand things off to Stephanie.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the Women in Bitcoin panel at PorcFest 2014. Thank you so much for coming. We've got a great lineup today, although a little unexpected. We've had a couple of changes. Catherine Bleich was on the way to PorcFest to moderate this panel, but she hit some traffic and she's not here yet. So I'm stepping in to moderate the panel. I'm Stephanie Murphy. I have been an early mover to New Hampshire. I moved to New Hampshire in 2006 because I was interested in the Free State Project. I'm also a talk radio host. I'm on the show, a host of the show Let's Talk Bitcoin. You may know me from that show. I found out about Bitcoin in 2011, and I've been using it ever since. So I'm really excited about Bitcoin. I'm also a voiceover artist, and I use Bitcoin quite extensively in my little freelance business. So I have some interesting experiences to talk about there as Bitcoin relates to entrepreneurship. And I want to introduce the rest of the ladies on the panel, or maybe would you like to introduce yourself? Should we do it that way? Why don't you just tell us your name and how you got involved in Bitcoin for the first time?
Hi, my name is Paige Peterson. I got involved in Bitcoin about a year and a half or 2 years ago when my roommate actually started paying me his portion of rent in Bitcoin, and just started getting more interested from the Liberty side of things. And so right now I'm actually organizer of the San Francisco Bitcoin meetup, and which is I think second largest in the country, next to New York. So I see a lot of different people and a lot of different excitement and a lot of like the businesses that are happening around it, because they're based in San Francisco. A lot of them are. So yes.
Hi, my name is Tatiana Moroz. I'm a singer-songwriter. I have become extensively more involved in Bitcoin in the past 6 months, but I first got my Bitcoin back in 2012 as a anti-war activist and a liberty, anarchy-oriented person. I found that Bitcoin is a great way to, help facilitate the anti-war message, and it's great for entrepreneurship and all these other things. So that's how I got involved.
I'm Megan Lords of Bitcoin Not Bombs. I'm the editor there. I also write for Bitcoin Magazine and do interviews with several Bitcoiners. I found out about Bitcoin a couple of years ago, and I was really skeptical at first, but what made it real for me was realizing that it was helping people in need. So most of my work revolves around the nonprofit and charity side of Bitcoin. Bitcoin for me is something that translates philosophy into practical action that you're seeing in the results of in real time. I also volunteer with Sean's Outpost, which is a Bitcoin-funded charity. We feed homeless people purely with Bitcoin donations.
My name's Lynn Ulbricht. I became involved in Bitcoin when my son Ross was arrested for allegedly being the creator and operator of Silk Road, the free market website that exclusively use Bitcoin. Just so you know, knowledge of Bitcoin is not genetic. I am not a particular expert in Bitcoin, but I can talk to you a bit about how the Silk Road case is poised to impact Bitcoin and digital currency. So that's what I'll be addressing.
Great, thank you so much, ladies. But there are no women in Bitcoin, right? Haven't you all heard that? I have heard it, and I think maybe I want to talk about that first. There has been a lot of talk about Bitcoin being mostly a male-dominated community. Has that been your experience in the Bitcoin world? Do you think there's anything about Bitcoin that is just for men or that keeps women out? Or anything else you want to say about the idea of women or gender in Bitcoin?
So yeah, I guess it kind of relates to a similar ratio for women in tech in general, being from San Francisco and going to various conferences and stuff. It's a very similar ratio. So in terms of, there is a difference in ratio. Definitely, if you go to the conferences and meetups, there's definitely less women. But I don't think it's specific to Bitcoin. It's definitely a more societal thing that that's way larger than what Bitcoin is. And to make it something about Bitcoin, I don't think is very productive.
I think that, I do a lot of music industry stuff, so I worked at a lot of different recording studios in the city. There's a lot of guys there. I think that personally, anytime I would hear about technology, I would get a little bit turned off. So I think that might account for some of it. On the other hand, the women that I do know in the Bitcoin space are really active, and they're really, I think, trying to blaze through with a lot of ideas, and they're making a big impact. So I guess it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, so there definitely are more men in Bitcoin, just like in the larger tech field. And I don't really view it as something that women are prohibited from being in it in any way. In fact, in the Bitcoin space, I've done activism in a few other areas, and in the Bitcoin space, I found just a tremendous amount of support from everyone involved, men and women, and it's been a very positive experience for me. The women who are involved in Bitcoin are extremely strong, extremely intelligent, and awesome people. And you're seeing, I think you're seeing a lot of the best people flocking to this space to really get involved in real activism. And I haven't had any problems as far as being a woman in Bitcoin. I don't even really like to think of myself as a woman in Bitcoin. I'm just kind of a person who's involved in Bitcoin, and that's kind of the way I like to think of it. Is I love the different directions you can go with it. There are a lot of different fields, and if there is sometimes you see this kind of maybe unbalanced ratio, I think it maybe has more to do with a focus on the certain male-dominated aspects within the community. Like the tech field is going to, like the more technical side, the mining side of things, the security side has a lot more men in it in general. So, and since Bitcoin is majority men, you see a lot of focus in that area. But you do see a lot of women active in other areas, like the kind of nonprofit side. When you start to focus on that, you see, hey, there's actually a good amount of women in Bitcoin. I think people should be free to, I just finished helping organize a Bitcoin in the Beltway conference, and I actually had a question from a reporter asking me, do you think that organizers should go out of their way to try to get more women involved? And my response is there already are a lot of women involved. I certainly wouldn't want to force anyone to make more women in the space artificially, but I will say it's Bitcoin is not it's a protocol, so it doesn't have, I don't view it as having much to do with gender. To me, it's very much a human rights movement.
An older woman who was terrible at math. I have a little more obstacle to deal with.
And I share that.
I said as a right-brained older woman who was terrible at math, I have a little bit of a block, but I'm learning, and I know lots of very smart women who, just as capable. So.
Yeah, and that was a bit of a block. I mean, math is definitely not my field. I'm more from the writing side of things. But
yeah, it's interesting. Just wanted to add a couple of thoughts to that. I've always thought of Bitcoin as a protocol as being neutral with respect to who uses it. So it doesn't matter where you are physically in the world. It doesn't matter what you're using Bitcoin for. You can use it. It's just like a telephone, basically. You know, telephones don't discriminate against who can use them. So there's nothing about Bitcoin itself, I think, that excludes women or anything like that, although the community is more predominantly male. As far as my experiences go, I've had mostly great experiences, you know, lots of support and great conversations from people within the community. There have been, you know, the occasional times where someone will message you online on a Bitcoin forum or something, and you have a gender-neutral name, and they'll start off with, hey man, hey bro, hey dude. You know, they just assume that you're a guy if you're interested in Bitcoin. There was a conference that I was considering going to that had 0 female speakers and like 35 male speakers. So that, you know, and that was in stark contrast to this Bitcoin in the Beltway, Megan, that you helped organize that just happened this past weekend, where there were lots of female speakers and lots of women attending. So perhaps conference organizers do have a little bit of a role in just extending invitations to interesting people in the space who happen to be women. But yeah, I guess that was just what I wanted to add. I haven't like felt really unwelcome anywhere I've gone in the Bitcoin space, but you do kind of notice the lack of women sometimes. So my next question is, what do you think? Well, I guess a two-part question. Do you think that something needs to be done to get more women involved in Bitcoin in general? And if so, what do we need to do?
So I think maybe focusing it on women as a gender rather than focusing it on the different perspectives that they can bring to the space. So individuals with that have kind of a more feminine outlook of the world can bring a really good opposing perspective to, say, a company or something that's made predominantly of masculine-minded people. That said, I don't think that necessarily has to be a woman that does it. But I do think that bringing different perspectives to anything is a great opportunity. And
what do you mean by a feminine or masculine perspective?
So I guess just in terms of right now, so I don't know, I guess I kind of associate like being feminine towards being more like, so there's more females kind of that do organizing kind of things that don't necessarily focus on technical stuff. I guess maybe not even feminine versus masculine, just the characteristics that tend to play out when you are of these genders. So I think in terms of bringing more women, I don't think that necessarily needs to happen. I think we need to bring more perspective in general, a differing perspective in general. And to do that, I think you could possibly like artificially inflate the numbers to kind of make it seem more equal. You could bring more speakers on. That would be a little less artificial. So pointing out very intelligent women that know exactly what they're talking about and have really smart things to say, and making those speakers and showing women like there are speakers out there and really intelligent people, so you can get into it as well. But I don't necessarily think that we should be like artificially inflating any sort of ratio of sorts.
Well, for me, you know, I'm a singer-songwriter, and my whole life I've always thought about how you can get a certain message out to the people in general. And what I've found with Bitcoin is that I've learned the most about it from other women. And I think that learning process it's just a little bit different. You know, women think about different things, and we relate to each other in a different way. So I think that that's, you know, an important thing. So whatever I do, I guess I identify with that, like pitching to women a little bit more than the guys, because I've felt excluded before. I mean, from anything from like asking a question, like, duh, you know, that kind of response. And it's just like, that's not a welcoming environment. So I hope that with me not being that familiar with everything, like even in, like I'm doing a lot of content for Tatiana Coin. I'm doing the first ever artist cryptocurrency. And so I've been making a lot of content, and I haven't been afraid to be like, I don't know, and ask and learn, because I think that experience allows other people to get a more welcoming feeling when they're stepping into the space, which I think could be slightly intimidating when you're not familiar with something. It's technology, and you don't want to sound stupid. So I don't know. That's my take on it.
So I did get a lot of positive feedback from Bitcoin in the Beltway. Like Stephanie said, there were a lot more female speakers. Someone actually crunched the numbers on it and told me there were like 40% more female speakers. I'm not sure. I haven't done the math on that. And someone asked me if I did that intentionally. And for me, women aren't a monolith. You know, when I was helping Jason put together this conference, we were looking for quality speakers. And it just so happened that there are a lot of awesome quality speakers who happen to be women, and that's kind of the way I think of it. Is I want to get more people involved in the space who are going to be quality people who have the right goals in mind with Bitcoin, because I kind of view the way Bitcoin is going, it kind of seems like there's a war on for the soul of Bitcoin. Insofar as there are a couple directions we can go. You can either go like a pro-regulation route, like let's work with the politicians, let's maybe compromise on some of the things that Bitcoin was founded on, or you know, you can stick with the principles. You can you know, have you know, something that is supposed to be decentralized and really focus on those aspects. So I want to bring more of those people in general to the space, and I think there are a lot of women who fit that mindset. So that's really what I'd like to focus on, is kind of, you know, let's get more quality people in. I'm not necessarily interested in bringing in more women who are going to be wanting to do the regulatory side and kind of maybe compromise. Like, to me, you know, we have to focus on the individual. You know, what are these individual women going to bring to the table? You know, and I think, you know, when you look at it that way, you have these varied experiences that are going to bring a lot into the space, and I think it will be more welcoming. I do agree that having more women, you know, represented as speakers or something like that, I heard at least feedback from a lot of women that they felt a lot more comfortable at this conference, that it was more welcoming. But yeah, I really want to focus on getting, you know, more of the right people involved who have their, you know, heart in the right place.
Well, rather than being excluded, I've been propelled into the Bitcoin world, and I really don't know that much about it. So, and I told Kat that when she asked me to be on the panel. So, but I think it's great, you know, and as a vehicle for freedom, fantastic. So, and of course, that's everybody.
And by the way, you know, I know your son allegedly may or may not be the Dread Pirates, but looking back at the Silk Road, the things that have come out of Bitcoin as far as, you know, getting help to people who need it in different ways, I think has been really awesome. And I think the Silk Road helped a lot of people. I mean, obviously it's known for some of the darker elements, but it did also help a lot of people and reduce a lot of violence from the drug war.
Yeah, so thanks for all your perspectives, ladies. I really like this panel because we're getting a real diverse mix. I've heard, you know, perhaps we need more of a cooperative perspective as opposed to competitive, or all different perspectives coming into Bitcoin. Perhaps we need to kind of stick together a little bit. Women reach out to other women and teach them about Bitcoin, help answer questions for newbies, you know, perhaps just get more quality people involved in Bitcoin in general who are on the pro-freedom side and who will respect that. And, you know, this is a really great mix of perspectives. So I want to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. And for Lynn, maybe you could talk a little bit about Ross and you know, what your experience has been in this world, a Bitcoin world, related to the Silk Road and all the publicity around that. But I think all of us are kind of have a little bit of entrepreneurship that we're doing, or involved in charities. Megan, you're involved in Bitcoin Not Bombs and Sean's Outpost. Tell me about like the use of Bitcoin in your business or your work, and how do you use it? Tatiana, you've got your own coin. So how do you use Bitcoin in your work, whether it be entrepreneurship or charitable work, to make things easier, I guess, on yourself and make it easier to do your business?
So I actually work for a company that's based in Scotland, and they pay me in Bitcoin, which is super easy. I don't need to deal with anything in terms of conversion or anything like that. So
Or wait for a check to come from Scotland, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't have to wait. It's instant, and so that is a very clear benefit of using Bitcoin. And then also in terms of organizing the San Francisco Bitcoin meetup, that I kind of use as a way to help get other merchants and individuals interested in Bitcoin in the area, so that I can use it more often, because I don't like changing to fiat to have to pay for things, because that's just a hassle, because that's what I have to do now, is actually change to fiat. So yeah.
I use Bitcoin as a store of wealth, personally. I find that to work really well. The iPhone has not been kind, but I guess they just put Coinbase back on it, so that's exciting. But aside from that, when I think of Bitcoin, I think of it more as like an ideological thing that I consider. And so, we did Tatiana Coin, and that to me is just the first step of the many things that can be built out. And in terms of visualizing how future businesses will be created, how people around those businesses, and not locationally, but just, in terms of like the peer-to-peer network, are going to be able to participate, I think that that's really exciting. So that's something that I'm trying to explore.
So Bitcoin has really beautifully kind of permeated all parts of my life at this point. So I do have a day job at Roberts & Roberts Brokerage, and we do take Bitcoin for precious metals. So while I don't get paid in Bitcoin there, we do take Bitcoin, and that's been really awesome. Also, I edit for Bitcoin Not Bombs, and I do get paid in Bitcoin for my articles, and also for Bitcoin Magazine there. And I do take Bitcoin too. I will be I'm kind of scaling back this, but I started doing an agorist business a few years ago when I was serving tables. I just dropped out of college, and I was looking for another source of income. So I started learning how to hula hoop dance and making hula hoops and stuff like that. And that was kind of like my agorist kind of side business. And I do take Bitcoin for that. I haven't had a whole lot of luck in general, just because the location I'm at in Pensacola, even though Sean's Outpost is based out of there, you don't see a whole lot of people taking Bitcoin just yet. But yeah, as far as the other work I do, it's been really helpful because it provides you a different type of financial security. I think a lot of people, in my generation have been robbed of, this financial security that maybe they were perhaps promised. So I view Bitcoin very much as a, generationally empowering currency for people who, we can't expect to be taken care of, when we get older. We have to do things for ourselves. And I think it's really empowering. One of my favorite speakers, I just have to mention this really quick, at Bitcoin in the Beltway, was Faresh Farrow, and she's with the Women's Annex, and she's actually paying women in Afghanistan who are bloggers in Bitcoin, and this is providing them financial independence. And this is extremely important for people who live in these areas where they don't have the kind of financial freedom that we take for granted. I could go to a bank and open up a bank account if I want to, but there are a lot of women who are not able to do that around the world. So Bitcoin is really great for them, or anyone who's unbanked, anyone who doesn't have access to a bank. I think it's really great for. It is frictionless. Unfortunately, we haven't reached that point where we can just go. We can go to a lot of places, that take Bitcoin, like you can turn Bitcoin into gift cards and things like that, but we're not quite at the point where it's as easy as it could be. So I really do like to focus on, that's kind of my focus with a lot of the writing and stuff I do, just kind of getting that out there and kind of spreading that, because it is so much easier to use. I mean, like it's such a bummer looking at your paycheck and seeing the taxes coming out of it, and that you're never going to see again, pretty much, and you don't know where where they're going. Like if I get paid in Bitcoin, it's like I see the coin, I see where it came from, I see, it's sitting in my wallet, I can use it for whatever, and it's just extremely easy to use. It's made, I think, my life a lot easier.
Well, as far as a job, fighting the federal government is definitely a full-time job. And we have gotten not most, but the majority of our donations for the Defense Fund in Bitcoin. At first, we were afraid to even take Bitcoin. The whole thing was so shocking and frightening and overwhelming. And the government actually does imply in its indictment that people who want privacy, such as people who use Bitcoin and Tor, actually have criminal intent. And so it's a little intimidating, but we do now. And as I say, we've gotten majority of our donations that way, and I think probably partly because of the anonymity. We've even gotten our lawyer to open a Bitcoin account so we can pay him directly and not have to pay as many fees. And so, and he's very low tech, so took a little explaining. But now he takes Bitcoin too. So it's really helped. And yeah, we welcome Bitcoin, just so you know, to pay him.
And I wanted to add on one thing. Something that's cool about the Bitcoin space is a lot of the organizations within it are very supportive of each other. And I just have to plug something Bitcoin Not Bombs has. We have these little camel pins that go to support Ross Ulbricht's defense fund. So if you're interested in supporting him, which it's a really awful situation what the government's done to him. So if you're interested in donating, you can donate directly, and we also have pins for sale and stuff too if you want to. Do that just to kind of show solidarity.
I just want to say that the government has indicted Ross with a money laundering statute, but they allege that that Silk Road only took Bitcoin. Well, that he, as running Silk Road, only took Bitcoin, and of course, the government's having a fight with itself about what is Bitcoin. Is it funds? Is it property? And you probably know the IRS, which the Supreme Court has repeatedly said is the authority, the ultimate authority in definitions, says it's property. And so does FinCEN. They say it's property, and or not funds. But the prosecution says definitions don't matter. And they say there will be no definitions in the money laundering statute, which our attorney says, well, this opens up huge vulnerability for all exchangeable goods to be funds, which means they're vulnerable to money laundering, liability, and prosecution. And just to say that this case, the defense is going to challenge their expansion of the definitions, which expands their ability to intrude, and that this case will probably be the first one in the courts challenging this going forward into the 21st century. So it's very impactful for digital currency. And I can go on about it. I'm prepared to do that. But I just wanted to say that, this is what's going on here.
Yeah, redefining the definitions of words all over the place. That's kind of what they do best. And I appreciate you bringing that to light, Lynn, because I wasn't aware of it.
Well, actually, I can say more, but it's unconstitutional. It's, Fifth Amendment forbids.
Yeah, let's get you to say a little more about that.
Okay. All right. So they are. So the statute, the money laundering statute, does not match the allegation. They're doing this through the whole indictment and for other things as well. And what FinCEN says is, the IRS says it's property, and the Supreme Court says the IRS is the expert, and then FinCEN says that virtual currency operates like a currency in some environments, but doesn't have all the attributes of real currency, and virtual currency does not have legal tender status in any jurisdiction. And so they're saying it is not funds. And of course, the prosecution says, well, the IRS isn't the authority. We're the authority. We get to say that, oh, it doesn't. You don't need these pesky definitions. Well, the Fifth Amendment says, the Due Process Clause in the Fifth Amendment says, an allegation must meet the precise description in the law. Now, these definitions are really important in law and in this kind of case. And even if you can argue, well, you can launder this or that, and this is, I've seen all kinds of arguments on the internet. The fact is that the statute has specific definitions. And they're trying to take a law that was made for the physical world and strong-arm it onto virtual reality. Instead of going, if they want a law that fits, they need to go to the legislature and make one. But that's kind of, inconvenient. So let's just hammer it on top of something that doesn't even fit. And like I say, it's going to set precedent. Whatever, if they get their way, they're targeting Bitcoin, and if they get their way, there will not be restrictive definitions in that statute, and we will all be more vulnerable to money laundering. Bartering, anything. And so it's beyond Ross. I really have seen from Ross's lawyer and the motions that he's put forward challenging these indictments, this whole case is beyond Ross, beyond Silk Road and all that.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. And thanks for all your responses to this question about entrepreneurship. I just want to get Catherine Bleich's perspective on here because she wasn't able to make it to this panel, unfortunately, which she was supposed to be moderating. But she's actually going on a tour of the U.S. right now and traveling using only Bitcoin. So is doing that through Expedia and through some other mechanisms. And she's trying to do it all just on Bitcoin. She's got a TV show called Sovereign Living that she's a part of. And she's documenting it all. So there's a really interesting thing about using Bitcoin for one's work or for one's travel or life activities. Just from my perspective related to entrepreneurship, I actually made a major career change about a year ago. I was working as a research scientist, and I wasn't happy doing that. So I decided, I'd really like to work for myself. And I think I can find a way to combine Bitcoin into that. So I started my own business as a voiceover artist. And, I'd been involved in radio shows and podcasts before that, so people told me I had a nice voice. I learned, I trained myself, I learned more about the voiceover world. And it's been going really well. But one of the things I found out as a freelancer, transitioning from getting a paycheck every month to making my own paycheck and making it happen for myself without any sort of safety net, was that it can take a month to get paid sometimes. I mean, freelancers know this, right? Like, sometimes you don't get paid for a long time. You might do a job and you're waiting for a check that's in the mail. Okay, I didn't receive it. Well, we'll have to resend it and void that other one, or we just never sent it in the first place. Oh, well, too bad. Doesn't matter that you have bills to pay. That kind of thing happens all the time. Also, Megan, you were mentioning Bitcoin is great for the unbanked, which I agree with, but it's also great for the banked because we have some problems that come with being banked, and one of those problems is this Department of Justice thing in the U.S. that's happening right now called Operation Choke Point, where they're pressuring banks to deny banking services to certain types of legal businesses that they just don't like those in the adult industry, or even certain, dating sites, products that offer lifetime warranties, products that simply have too many chargebacks on their accounts, are getting their bank accounts just cut off with pretty much no recourse. So when things like that can happen to you if you are banked, then being banked sometimes becomes a problem, in addition to a convenience that you can take advantage of. So Bitcoin has just been great as a freelancer to be able to receive payments instantly. Everybody has verification that the payment was sent and received. It's on the blockchain. Being able to take payments, like Paige said, from clients anywhere in the world, without having to wait for them to convert the currency and send a check and all that, dealing with all that hassle. I also work with a Bitcoin-based charity, which is completely based in Bitcoin, called Free Aid. We're actually up here at PorcFest, and Free AIDS volunteers are providing volunteer first aid to the campground. If you need anything like a Band-Aid or sunscreen or an ice pack or anything like that, bug spray, we've got it up at the first aid tent there. And we've been operating in Bitcoin only for the past year. We receive donations in Bitcoin. We buy our stuff in Bitcoin through sites that enable you to get first aid supplies with Bitcoin. So that's been really great, and we've had a lot of support from the Bitcoin community as far as that goes too. And yeah, I guess I've been talking for a little while. So why don't we do another question? And the question I wanted to ask, and then maybe we'll open it up to the audience for questions, is where does each of you see Bitcoin in the next year? Think back to a year ago at PorcFest and where Bitcoin was. Would you have imagined that it would be here today? It seems like things move so fast in this space. So where do you think we'll be a year from now, 5 years from now? Have fun with it.
So yeah, it definitely does advance very quickly. I think, the amount of user and merchant adoption is just going to keep going up exponentially. Word of mouth, more people have it, the more people they talk to, it's just going to go up even quicker. I think we're also going to see some challengers, perhaps, in the field, and presenting possibly better methods of doing what Bitcoin does, or maybe possibly making it a little more anonymous, or working with something that is kind of more complementary, so you can still use Bitcoin, and then there's something that, because in the end Bitcoin really isn't anonymous, so I think we still need to solve that problem. So yeah, in 5 years I think I don't even think I can predict that far. I think it's going to be completely different. I don't even think I would be able to fathom what 5 years from now will be in cryptocurrency world and crypto world in general and internet world in general. Think about how quickly everything's advancing. I think, it's just going to be so much more integrated in life. Half of the people might not even be realizing that they're using cryptocurrencies. They're just, using a company that they've always used before that's adopted Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency as their back end, sort of. I think it'll be much more definitely just penetrated into society. Won't be so much about the technology, just that it exists and that people are using it, and it's just spreading that way.
I think that every day in Bitcoin, it's like my mind is blown. So, I'm learning about all this new stuff all the time. But what I'd like to see, and what I think will end up happening, is the impact that Bitcoin can make on society and cryptocurrency. The business stuff is really exciting, but the possibilities for charities, for music, for entrepreneurship, I think it gives people an alternative and an actual action item. Whereas there's so many people in the country that are so dissatisfied. I think that if they're shown Bitcoin in the right light, it can really be used for social good, and that's what I'd like to see happen. And I think the price is probably going to go up.
So yeah, time is an interesting thing in the Bitcoin world. I've noticed everything just moves so blindingly fast sometimes. And it's really cool to see a lot of these kind of businesses and nonprofits and charities jumping into this technology without worrying, what the government's going to do about it. Because that's going to be problematic when you have a technology that can liberate a lot of people. There are a lot of other people whose, that's not in their best interest. So I think you're going to see a lot more kind of pushback against Bitcoin, but I think the more the government kind of tries to clamp down on it, the more resistance you're going to see from a large variety of people too. I meant to mention this earlier, Bitcoin Not Bombs came out of an alliance with antiwar.com, and antiwar.com started taking Bitcoin after it was revealed that they were being spied on by the FBI. And what it did is it scared a lot of their donors off, which, I mean, I think that's, anyone who's donating to nonprofits that are controversial, like WikiLeaks or antiwar.com, if you find out that the government's spying on you, you may not want to donate so much. So that can be a huge problem. And Bitcoin kind of goes around that. And it's also bigger than Bitcoin. Like Paige was saying, I think you're going to see a lot more developments in, improving anonymity. It's about blockchain technology for me long term. I think Bitcoin is a great first start. I think it's obviously the most used, cryptocurrency at the moment, but I think you're going to see a lot of innovation coming out in the space. And I think we're going to have a lot of alternatives. I'm not the best at predictions, but I would really love to see 5 years from now, people using a variety of these cryptocurrencies. It's not just limited to Bitcoin. You can have these for whatever project you need, like Tatiana Coin. I mean, it's supporting artists. You can have a wide variety of cryptocurrencies to use, and I think it's going to become, because it's so easy to use too, I mean, it's easier than using a credit card, it's easier than cash. It has all of these built-in functions that make it very user-friendly, even if you don't understand the technical aspects of it, and I think people are going to realize that, and I think they're going to say, why am I paying these credit card companies, these ridiculous processing fees and stuff like that? Why am I paying 12% to Western Union to send money to other places in the world? All of these things that we have now, by comparison to this technology, kind of fall apart. So I'd really like to kind of see that, and I do think this year, I think especially, is going to be a very, very exciting one, and there's going to be a lot of, I think a lot of pushback, or a lot of clamping down on the government, but then a lot of pushback as a result from that, and that's at least what I'm hoping to see.
In the indictment, the government said, and this is a quote, "Federal laws are expansive and adaptable," which the Constitution absolutely says is not true. And it seems to me that we're at a crossroads, and this is uncharted territory in the courts. And what happens with this case, of course I'm focused on this case, will determine the future of digital currency. And it seems to me, from what I've observed dealing with them, is that they're really keen on expanding their control, and they don't like it when things aren't under their control, as far as I can tell. So I think it's hard to predict. I certainly hope that our pushback and the pushback of others will stop this and not have precedent set that could, really have a negative impact on the future of Bitcoin and digital currency.
Great, thanks. And I would like to open it up for questions from the audience, so maybe if you have any questions, hang on to them, think about them for a moment. But I just want to take a minute before we do that to have each of us sort of talk about, just a few minutes about the project that you're working on right now. Like Paige, maybe you could talk about MadeSafe. Tatiana, you talk about Tatiana Coin and what you've been doing with that. Megan, talk about Sean's Outpost or Bitcoin Not Bombs, whatever you want. And Lynn, talk more about the case and the fundraising.
So the company that I work for that's based in Scotland is actually making, they've been working on an alternative internet protocol for the past 8 years or so. They have been kind of coming out to the Bitcoin community because it's very similar in philosophy and not so much technology, but kind of in the same sense that it's peer-to-peer. So I'm basically kind of a representative for them in the States for now. They're really busy preparing for a testnet stage, which, the Bitcoin network went through as well before it got released. There was a testnet stage, and there's still a testnet that you can work with if you're a developer. So that's what we're getting ready for. And I also am helping them kind of set up this developer community in San Francisco area, because that's a really great place to do a developer community. I think I'm really excited about what they're doing, because I think it can be a really great, I guess I was kind of hinting at it in my previous answer, in that I think it can be really complementary to what Bitcoin offers in terms of actually making things anonymous and not working with a global ledger. That is what the blockchain is. I think, the blockchain is a really great invention and really great technology, but you can't hide the fact that it's a global ledger that everyone can see. So any technology you add to that, say what Darkcoin is doing, is kind of trying to route around that key fact. So I think, there can be alternative protocols that allow for the ability to be a little, maybe not completely anonymous. Maybe we'll never reach that point, but the amount of anonymous that it takes for like someone to be able to find you, it takes them it's not worth it to them, because that's really what it's about, is making it not worth someone to actually find you. So.
I'm a huge fan of MadeSafe. I highly recommend you guys go to their website, madesafe.net. I had it explained to me by David Irvine, like the main guy over there, and he blew my mind. And I wish I could explain it well, but you guys just have to watch a video and start. That's what I meant about every day your mind is blown in Bitcoin. So Tatiana Coin has been a little bit of an experience like that for me. So what it is, for those of you that don't know, is it's sort of like an Indiegogo campaign, but with a longer term reward. So if you do an Indiegogo, what do you get? You get like a t-shirt, you get like some stupid thing, and you're like, okay, forget about that person that I donated to. It's not really worth anything. Maybe it is if you really like that person, but otherwise that's the exit point. With Tatiana Coin, it's a tokenization system. So now they're almost like super fans, and they get exclusive access to things. And as I become more successful, the thought, or what we're trying to see is will that Tatiana Coin, that token, become more valuable? Because now there's going to be a limited amount of tokens, and there's going to be more people that want them. So it's very transferable, and for me it's been really great because it gives me sort of an accountability with my audience. So that's been really great. But what we're trying to do is raise money to do my third album. I tour around the world as it is, but I'd like to kind of expand that. And I'm doing a video series documenting a lot of that stuff, how you can use, crypto and mix it in with art and entrepreneurship, and feature different kinds of profiles and human interest stories that I think are good. And then I'm also working with Bitcoin Magazine. So that's very exciting. And I'm just, really inspired by the space. What we're doing with Sean's Outpost right now, we've kind of run into some issues with the county pushing back against some of our plans. So one of the things that we do is deliver meals to the homeless in Pensacola, and it's really interesting because it's really much proof of this kind of this fully fueled Bitcoin charity helping a lot of people. So it's really inspiring to be around Jason and Mike and the other people involved. They delivered 60,000 meals to the homeless in a year, which is amazing and really, sets a good example. And we're also trying to get Satoshi Forest running, which is a 9-acre property that will house homeless people. It would be a campground setup. Right now, they have limitations on how many people we can have there. We're still trying to get through the permitting process and all that, so we're going to be focusing on that probably the next year, and we hope to have it fully functional and be able to allow more people on the property, because Pensacola is a really economically depressed area, and there are a lot of homeless people who need a lot of help that have fallen through the cracks, and that a lot of the other organizations just can't keep up with. It's even hard. It's hard to keep up with this growing homeless population. So we're just working on getting them help. Bitcoin Not Bombs is going to be doing a Hoodie the Homeless project this year. Last year we did it during winter, and if you buy a hoodie from us, we will donate a hoodie to a homeless person. We'll also be doing meals, lunches for them, other necessities that they need. So we're hoping to expand that to a few more cities. Last year we were only able to do one city. This year we'll be doing it, in Pensacola, California, and hopefully a few other places. And then I'll continue to be doing interviews and writing for Bitcoin Magazine. I'm wanting to get a more regular show kind of going, kind of like a YouTube show. So I'm going to be working on trying to put that together in the next few months. But there's a lot of really exciting projects in the charity sphere that I'm really looking forward to.
Well, as I said, trying to defend my son has become a full-time job. And we just didn't feel like we're not rich people, despite what you may have read in the media. And but I just couldn't help but think that having a public defender who worked for the government was a conflict of interest, since the prosecutor was worked for the government. We were very fortunate to have an excellent lawyer who was willing to work with us and be flexible, and my agreement with him was that I would do everything I could to compensate him fairly by raising funds and, of course, paying him as well as we could out of our own personal money. And so that's what I do. And we have a website, freeross.org. It's informational as well. And we have, I'm going to talk more about all this on Saturday as well at 10, about the whole case. More of this wonderful news of what the government's doing to the Constitution. But anyway, so that's what I'm mainly concentrating on, and I'm really excited because I think we have coming really close to having paid him for last November of 2013. Yay! On to December. So these lawyers are not cheap. He's working with us, but it's a mountain of work. This is a really complex case, and they are really working hard. And I feel like they deserve compensation, and so that's what I'm working on is just trying to get that for them and raise awareness, and every little bit helps, and getting the word out. So freeross.org.
And I think a lot of libertarians and anarchists can appreciate, supporting people within our own community, and the Bitcoin community is very similar. So I really hope we can help Ross out because, the Silk Road, it gets, obviously there's a lot of negative connotations, but it was really revolutionary in a lot of ways. And whether or not he was the founder of it, he really is being made an example of right now, and we really need to show support for him and family.
Right on. Well, I think I'd like to open it up to the audience in case anybody has questions for the ladies on the panel. And by the way, just a wonderful group of women. Thank you so much for being here with us. And for all the really thoughtful and intelligent things you all had to say. I really appreciate your perspectives that you brought here. So does anyone in the audience have any questions that they'd like to ask?
My question is, how does the case of Ross set a precedent when it comes to cryptocurrency?
How they define it, for one thing, and if it's subject to money laundering charges or not. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but that is a big part of it, is it subject to money laundering statutes or not? If it isn't, then it's a whole different ballgame than if it is. It seems to me that it opens a door to potential regulation and other types of control, but I can't predict what those would be if the prosecution has its way and there is no definition of funds and Bitcoin is under that umbrella. And then it's subject to money laundering charges. But as I say, I'm not a lawyer. That's what I understand from Ross's lawyer.
Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate everyone being here.
This episode is brought to you by CryptoKit.com and listeners like yourself. Today's magic word is tech. That's T-E-C-H, tech. You've got until the 13th of September to visit letstalkbitcoin.com and enter the magic words for your share of the listener rewards. Back to the show.
I'm joined by Charlie Shrem. Charlie is one of the earliest adopters that I know in the Bitcoin space, one of the earliest entrepreneurs. When I was first learning about Bitcoin 2 years ago, he was extremely patient in explaining things to me. He and his colleagues at his old company, BitInstant. He's definitely a celebrity within the Bitcoin community. He's had a very challenging year, to say the least, and he's here to talk to us about what he has learned. So it's been a rough 2014.
It has been a crazy year.
Start talking. If you could talk to yourself, 3 years ago or 3-4 years ago when you entered this space, what advice would you give your younger self?
I kind of get asked that question a lot the past few weeks. And there's really, as looking as an entrepreneur and a person with a few businesses, one of the biggest mistakes that I made in terms of how I ran the business and actually could have helped me with my current legal situation is that I was the boss of everyone. And so we grew to 20 employees in less than a year from me running the company out of my basement. I was the CEO, I was the customer service specialist, I was the chief compliance officer, and I cleaned the toilets. I did everything for the company because it was only me. This was throughout 2012. I was the only employee of the company when my alleged crimes actually took place, and it wasn't until 2013 that we actually got funding and we, a few $1 million, and we grew the company and everything. And I wanted to be hands-on. I wanted to know everything about everyone in the company, and you can't do that. And so when things got really big and we started going from doing $500,000 of volume to doing $10 million of volume a month and doing over 50,000 transactions a month, things got really big too fast. And the company didn't have enough management layers and kind of a pyramid to be able to continue to growth and scale. And I wasn't an experienced enough CEO and entrepreneur to do that. This was my second company, but I was only 22 at the time. I'm only 24 now.
I'm assuming everyone here in the room knows the subtext here. They're aware that Charlie has a sort of Damocles hanging over him right now. But you have, all things considered, you've made the most of it. You are working now with Payza?
Yeah, I'm consulting for a few companies now. Payza is a company based in Montreal with headquarters in India and in the UK. It's kind of refreshing because I'm so used to working with startups with less than 10 people, and now I'm working for this mega company for me, they have 300 people. They have over 10 million wallets. Payments company has been around over 8-9 years already. I'm consulting for a few banks now too. They say, Charlie, we're interested in either just bringing you on board for a few months just to kind of help us strategize if Bitcoin is something that could potentially make us money or be a revenue stream for us. We'd like to bring you onto the team just as a consultant privately to see if this is something that's worth exploring for us. And I've gotten large banks and large companies to help me help them do that. And it's been a lot of fun because I'm learning a lot. Things have been working out. I'm no longer under house arrest anymore. I couldn't leave my house for like 5 months with an ankle bracelet on my leg, and now I'm under curfew, so I can leave my house from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., which is a lot better.
Earlier today we were talking about the bit license proposal. Ironically, I understand that you were involved very early. You said that you were an early part of that dialogue.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and people say that you kind of like coined the term bit license. I don't know who coined that term, but I mean, I was in Lawsky's office and the DA's office and with Homeland Security since 2011. I mean, educating them. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees engaging with the regulators and working with them and creating PowerPoint presentations and taking hours out of my day downtown. I could run in this business teaching them about Bitcoin because I didn't want them to go out and start arresting people. I didn't want them to start going out and doing all of these things. And I worked with everyone. I mean, I allowed them to come to my office and we'd go down there and we'd work with them very closely. And I mean, I go back to that question, what was my biggest mistake? I thought that these guys are my friends. And everyone's going to laugh at me because everyone in the payment space and the financial space knows that regulators are not your friends, they're not your pals. And I was painstakingly naive. I thought that if I engaged them, if I worked with them, if I taught them, if I educated, then it would be a lot friendlier. They would come to us and say, how do you think you should be regulated? And literally, one of the questions I remember specifically I walk into this room downtown at New York State Department of Financial Services office. I get into a big room, and you have about eight of them on all different scales, like the boss, the interns, everyone was in the room. And it was me and my two lawyers side by side. And I sit there, and the first thing they say to me, "So Charlie, how should we regulate Bitcoin?" First question, I'm like, whoa, I was not prepared for that. And I said, well, basically, let's take a step back for a second, and let me explain to you what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a protocol, like email. You can't regulate email, but you can work with and regulate companies that operate email, and you can set up consumer protection, just like Gmail, AOL, etc. Bitcoin has companies. And if done the right way, you can successfully stop illegal payments and provide consumers the protection that you'd like to provide to them at the same time without stifling innovation and without making jobs leave from New York. And unfortunately, that's happened. Most of my best friends in the Bitcoin community that I kind of worked with here in 2011, half of my old BitInsta team moved. They left. They went to Europe. They moved to Panama. They moved to California, Florida. Just like there's no one here. There's like 2 Bitcoin communities left in New York now. They're all gone because it's stifling. Unfortunately, what's happening in the Bitcoin space now, if the bit license as it is currently actually gets pushed through, what's going to happen is what happened in the early days of PayPal is that there are very few financial companies that actually have all 50 state money transmitter licenses, because there are only few of them that can actually afford to get that. And it's very difficult to get a banking license and everything these days. It's the same thing. It's just impossible. So you have a lot of these big companies that Bitcoin companies that raise $30 million and raise 20, they come and they speak at these events like this one and say, yeah, the regulations are awesome, let's engage. But these guys have a competitive edge, because essentially if these regulations come out as they are, these guys can afford them. These are the ones that have the VC funding. Yeah, these guys have the VC funding, and they can afford these as things are, and effectively push all of the other smaller Bitcoin startups out of business. And unfortunately, it's the smaller Bitcoin startups, like the guys who just came out, like Mastercoin, Ethereum, and guys like Peter Todd, that are the ones that are doing the actual innovation in the Bitcoin space. The actual innovation, the actual development of the Bitcoin protocol that's happened hasn't been from these large companies that have raised $30 million. They're from the smaller guys that are running their businesses out of their basement. And it's becoming too difficult for them. I'm just nervous that kind of what happened 50 years ago or 30 years ago could potentially happen again. And we're so close in that next step in technological financial innovation with math-based payment systems. We're so close to be able to send money as quickly as email. Like back in the day, our grandparents were probably so excited that you could walk into a post office and send a letter and it'll get there in 3 days. Like, wow, 3 days to send a letter to someone? That's amazing. And then my dad is like, whoa, a message to someone in Russia in seconds? Is that physically possible? Email did to the postal service. Bitcoin is doing to money what, email did to like the postal service. It's a totally game changer. And I'm nervous, because I've been around in this space a really long time, that what has happened in the early days of payment innovation, which is the reason that things are so archaic, like ACH, that it's just going to not move. It's going to move a lot slower. It'll kind of build a brick wall on any sort of innovation. That's what I'm nervous about.
If I could challenge that just a little bit, just to be devil's advocate, there's information and there's money. And I think everyone agrees it's great that the internet made it so easy to send information instantaneously anywhere. But money is a claim on real resources in the real world. It gives people power, and if in theory, if in the wrong hands, one might argue, it can do a lot of damage. So is it questionable that should money be as easily transferable, frictionless, the way information is?
I think to a point it should be. I think that illegal payments and terrorism and all these things are very real and very bad. But there's a right way to do things. What happened, we're having this argument now, but what happened if they told us in 2000-something that in order to create an email address, you have to attach a real name and identity to it? That would be a very scary thing.
That's what Michael Hayden wants.
But that's a very scary thing, because you have people that essentially what's going to happen is you're going to be controlling culture and knowledge. And you're going to be doing what the Catholic Church did when the printing press came out, is that up until the printing press, you had the church essentially controlled all culture and knowledge. I mean, people didn't even need to learn to read and write, because why? The church tells us everything we need to know. And in order, you had monks that would sit there and they write, copies of the Bible and all religious works and everything. And if you were someone like Galileo who wanted to challenge the church, you had no way to kind of spread your information around. And then all of a sudden the printing press comes along. And with the advent of the printing press, all of a sudden someone could have these ideas printed out and distributed and actually, spread knowledge. There's no central point of control anymore. And that was amazing. And the royal family of England said, whoa, people spreading their own culture. No, we can't have this. And they think of the children. They created a law that we all know today, which is copyright. And actually copyright was created when the royal family basically said that anyone who wants to print anything at the printing press needs our permission to do it. And only things that were sanctioned by the royal family can actually be printed. And that's where copyright came from. And I'm just nervous that, yes, you can have people spreading false information like the Elders of Zion and BS like that, and there's a level of consumer protection and protecting people in the society as a whole, but there's just a point like attaching names to email addresses or requiring that everyone register if they want to make a print of a book or their own work. I'm just nervous that with Bitcoin, it could happen because it's so new and so scary.
Yeah. Is money speech?
That's a very good question. I'm going to ask you that. Is money speech?
I have been pondering this quite a bit in my own mind for a long time. And I tend to think that it at least it can be. One of the great examples that we like to talk about, with Bitcoin being neutral was that, when there was a blockade around WikiLeaks, and there was no official blockade, but a couple U.S. politicians leaned on MasterCard and Visa and said, and PayPal, and said, you've got to stop donations that are being sent to this organization, WikiLeaks, because they're a terrible organization that's revealing government secrets. And I don't blame those companies for complying with the request because they have shareholders. They're not in the business of being martyrs. They have a business to run. So it was probably a prudent decision to comply. But if you look at it in the bigger picture, you have a publisher, a controversial publisher, but a publisher nonetheless, that embarrassed the government, and that people that didn't like that were able to use the payment system to try to censor this publisher, whatever you think about it. And that organization was able to get around that. They survived because Bitcoin doesn't care who you are. If you're Jamie Dimon or you're the milkman, you can still use the Bitcoin network, at least as it stands today. The flip side, though, is, and so that's why I've always thought it was pretty cool. But the flip side of that is, so what if, so does that mean that a real monster like Robert Mugabe, can take his, ill-gotten plunder out of his country and send it through this neutral network that doesn't care who he is? Is that the price? Is that the price we pay?
Is the price to pay? Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's where's the line? Where's the slippery slope? Because you can make the same argument with email. Like, email is fantastic because I can send messages and it's free speech, and I can send messages to my family all over the world, and I can, report from a war zone that's subjecting people, freedom of the press. But at the same time, email is a way that terrorists communicate with each other. And who's to say that maybe that if they did attach names to emails, that in order to have email, just you have to have a real name, 9/11 couldn't have happened. Who knows? You can make that argument both ways. So I agree with you. Bitcoin is some sort of freedom or freedom of speech, and I think that these things are very real and very bad and very scary and could potentially be very negative. But I think that Bitcoin's pros and really advantages could outweigh the negatives, just like email did if done the right way. I mean, in the beginning, I met a guy the other day who used to consult like Netscape and those type of companies. He said, well, they kind of were scared of the same thing, but no one knew what was going on. So they just kind of like let it be with email and technology. I don't know if Bitcoin's that way, but I think that if innovation is choked and stifled, it could be the end of Bitcoin. It's a scary thought. So it has to be done the right way. And I think that a lot of governments, like I think the European Commission and the United Kingdom, are doing a really good job at trying to regulate Bitcoin. I think that...
What are they doing differently?
It's a very transparent process. So if you want to get a virtual currency license, an e-money license in, for example, the Netherlands, which passports to a lot of other European countries. My friend just got it for his Bitcoin company, BitPay. What they do is that there's one office that does it. There's a very straight out process that's extremely transparent. You know exactly who's handling your application at what time. If there's a problem with it, you can go to their office, you can talk to them. It's tiered based on the volume of your company. The best part, he told me, is that it could, just like here, it could take a year or two before your application actually gets approved or denied. While they're assessing your application, you kind of have like a patent pending type of thing where you can do up to a certain amount of volume, so you don't have to wait 2 years to actually start your business. And I think that, the fact that I think there's one office in each country that handles this, and it's a really transparent and much quicker and faster process. And then you can passport this, because it's one standard, to the rest of the European Union. So then you can work with Poland and Germany and Austria and all these different countries if you have a license in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, what is it, like 47 states now? We call ourselves the United States, yet you need a license in every single state, almost every single state. And so it's almost impossible. Some states, there are like 15 companies that actually have that's it. It's crazy. It's just how to start a financial. I scratch my head because to do any sort of financial service company or anything, it's just a really a high mountain to climb.
I want to get back to something that you mentioned earlier. There's this big question, I think, in the startup space in general. You see it with Uber, you see it with Airbnb. And I think we even saw in the early days of PayPal, I think there was one state that was going to clamp down on PayPal. I think it might have been Louisiana.
A lot of them, right? PayPal strategy was just like, we'll do it and worry about the licensing later on. And it happened. They had to scramble and get licenses in these states within a few months.
Right. And Uber, when Uber gets a lot of customers, and then the city council in whatever city it is says, you're competing with our taxis. We can't have that. Then they flood the city government with mail, email, and the regulators will walk back. So the question is it better to ask permission or beg forgiveness, based on everything that you now know?
I tried asking for permission, but they wouldn't give me an answer. It was just like, well, we're still new, we're still learning. And I shut my company down voluntarily 8 months before I was arrested. Completely. My lawyer sent me a letter saying, Charlie Shrem, Bitcoin is too much in a gray area right now. To regulate FinCEN comes out with their thing. We thought you were in the white. Now we represent you, and if you continue operating past this weekend, this was a Friday, we can no longer represent you as a firm because we believe that you possibly could be money transmission. And I said, oh shit. And we shut down the company. And then, as I'm getting a bank account and as I'm fundraising and months go by and I think everything's okay, I'm coming off of a plane and I'm being thrown down at JFK Airport from the SWAT team.
With reporters present.
With reporters present and put in solitary confinement for 30 hours.
How do they know to be there? Do you want to take some questions?
Sure.
Sir.
So, in a comment about Robert Mugabe and being able to use Bitcoin, but he's a billionaire already. He has offshore bank accounts.
He just goes to HSBC.
And furthermore, and that's just international. I mean, I could give you a much easier way. LLC in a state that doesn't show any of any of the directors. You could,
British Virgin Islands or something,
or New Mexico, or you could buy property in another country where there's no record. So, I guess my challenge to you, or guys, I mean, maybe it's obvious you know this already, but I mean, what does Bitcoin do that isn't already done in terms of money laundering? And furthermore, isn't Bitcoin's transparency, doesn't it actually mitigate the risks of money laundering because there is an audit trail?
I mean, I think that was a point that people brought up on several of the panels earlier, is that compared to cash, at least, it's at least one step up in terms of traceability.
It's pseudo-anonymous and it's private. And people, like I think Satoshi realized that yes, terrorism and Mugabe are real threats. So how do you, at one point, protect the privacy of the consumer? Because when I spend my credit card, there are about 30 people that are looking at my credit card statement. The credit card companies, the credit companies, the banks. Everyone can see what you're purchasing at any given time. Who cares, though, really? Like, it doesn't make it... You're so used to giving up your privacy in the internet at this point, it's like, whatever. But at the same time, there's that, like, fine line. So with Bitcoin, you have the privacy of the average purchase. If you're going to a nightclub and spending 10 grand on champagne, no one has to know that. But if you're going and you're buying a rocket launcher, someone should know that. And so, like I said, I think that consumer protections and legal payments, these things are real, and that regulating the companies around the Bitcoin space in a very transparent and productive way is important. But I think that some states and some countries aren't doing the best job as they should be. I think they're trying to overregulate and overstep and then feel like they can pull back eventually. But Bitcoin is so new, it's like a new baby that's born. If you hold it too tight, like of mice and men, you could choke it and it could die. It's a grade of mice and men.
Another question?
What's up, Bruce?
Hi, thanks. My name is Bruce Fenton. So it's interesting you mentioned the press, kind of how did they happen to show up? I mean, my suspicion, I think it seems not coincidental that they just happened to be there. Also with the timing of your arrest right before the hearings, which, really seems to be a media show. And even when I first heard about it, I didn't know you at the time, and I said, oh, this is terrible, some terrible person doing something to make Bitcoin look bad. And then I kind of looked at it and I said, okay, suspicion of failure to file a suspicious activity report. I mean, I've been in financial services for 22 years. I've never, ever seen anybody thrown down by a SWAT team for anything close to that. I mean, there's people that you could see who commit all kinds of massive fraud and even those guys don't have a SWAT team. And it seems like, I used to work at Morgan Stanley. I never, ever saw anybody get thrown down with a SWAT team at Morgan Stanley by, failures. It would be very, very unlikely in a room of financial people that you could argue that any other institution outside of Bitcoin would have jail time for something like that. Usually it's kind of outright fraud. But anyway, the thing that makes me wonder about this is that the whole size of all the Bitcoin is only like $7 or $8 billion, and there's probably more money laundering on Third Avenue here than there is in Bitcoin. So I'm wondering, kind of why the overwhelming focus on this in turn, compared to other institutions like we all know about, other large institutions, some of them right here in this room who've already been caught laundering huge amounts of money. Why so much focus on Bitcoin and what is it that do you think it's fear of by the governments, or what is the reason for this overwhelming focus on something that is like you said, it's a baby that is so small that it's not even as significant as what you might see in a very, very tiny industry?
I don't know. And my lawyers have kindly requested that I don't speculate to that reason yet either. But I mean, what I will tell you is that you're right. I mean, when I first got arrested, I'm like, all right, guys, to my lawyers, like, how much we're talking about here? 30 million, 100 million? They're like, $1 million. It's like, what? That's it? You're talking about less than 0.025% of all transactions that took place over a 1-year period. I mean, if banks are getting, have like 2%, which is 2,000 times more than what I'm being arrested for, like that's something that they're like proud of. I don't know. I'm not really a financial person, so I don't know. But it's a really small amount. I feel like that they alleged that people used my company to then buy Bitcoin, to then use those Bitcoins allegedly on an illegal website. It's like I'm like 6 steps removed also. It's like if someone pulls out cash at an ATM machine and uses that cash to buy drugs on the street, they arrest the guy who owns the ATM machine or the guy who has the ATM machine in his store.
I will say that, I mean, there is a lot of focus at the financial institutions on strengthening AML controls, and that started with the big banks. No one at HSBC went to jail, but they did pay a fine, a fairly large fine. JP Morgan has paid fines, and now we're hearing a lot about the examiners are now looking at the smaller banks and going into the smaller banks and scrutinizing their AML controls. One former regulator told me recently that one thing examiners will look at is they'll look at transactions, and if you didn't file a suspicious activity report, you have to have a reason in your system for why you didn't, if it's a certain type of transaction that might raise a flag. So if it's like a restaurant that did $50,000 in cash over the weekend, and you, the banker, know that restaurateur very well, every weekend they bring in $50,000 in cash, you have to have an explanation ready for, I didn't file an
What would you write though? Like what would you write? That's a good example. What would
large
you write?
cash deposit, suspicious. But this is some of what examiners are expecting. And if you look at the cover story of our monthly magazine, it's all about how the smaller banks are drowning in BSA compliance. The other thing that really is remarkable is, and I kind of hinted at this gently earlier, Bitcoin is neutral. And that is one of the things that the Bitcoin community loves about Bitcoin, is that it's neutral. So you can't censor transactions. So someone can send money to WikiLeaks and not have it vetoed by some third party that doesn't want WikiLeaks to exist. That is very much, and you guys would know better than I do because you're actually in the business, but based on our coverage of American Banker, that is very much the opposite of the way regulation is now steering financial services. Operation Choke Point is sort of an extreme example of this idea that banks are deputies. Banks are part of the police. Banks are, you're not just a neutral service. Financial institutions can't just be, some neutral utility. You have this special role to play in society.
Is that how you view regulation? I mean, how do you define the word regulation? Is to regulate. How do you define that word?
Well, there's different types. There's consumer protection regulation, and there's making sure you're not ripping people off, you're not defrauding people, and then but AML is sort of part of this continuum of this other type of regulation that payment processors are expected to police fraud, but as a result of payment processors being expected to police fraud. That is why PayPal has to be really, really, really nasty, for example, with like crowdfunding projects, because if it turns out that a crowdfunding project was fraudulent, then and PayPal facilitated that, they don't want to take any risks. So that's why people's funds get bottled up in those kind of situations. Anyway, does anyone in here disagree with what I'm saying? Because
really suffering under FATCA because the banks are all preparing for FATCA. So even in the traditional, it's basically Accounting and Transactions Compliance Act. So basically it means that every American has to report every account and make sure that they're filing properly, which is fine. But what's happening is that the banks, and HSBC is one, and there are others, are actually just shutting down Americans, lock, stock, and barrel, all around the world. And it's not because they've been prohibited from dealing with Americans or American businesses.
Too much of a risk.
It's the banks. They're like, they do a cost-benefit analysis, and the profitability of the account falls under a level. And so they're just shutting accounts for Americans all around the world right now to get ready for FATCA at the end of the year. And I think people underestimate what that's going to do to the U.S. Yeah, I mean, banks are getting out of remittances. They're getting out of current accounts for foreign citizens. I think it guarantees Bitcoin's success over the long term, but in the short term,
the beauty of
it's
what you're
painful.
talking about this infrastructure. Yeah, I know people that are building it and they're using Bitcoin, because don't forget, Bitcoin is not just a currency, and that's kind of like what I don't really talk about. I don't, how much is Bitcoin? They forget that Bitcoin is a payment system. Bitcoin is an experiment. It's an idea. It's a thought process. How can you have a trustless third party to help move value? I don't even use the word money. I use value. I have value. You have value. How do we transfer that value?
Well, that's why I thought this has been a really wonderful conference, because, for example, the
Ethereum?
Yeah, the guys were there earlier. The other protocol, the
Ripple. Both are awesome projects.
There's another example also, because one of the challenges of Bitcoin that we were talking about a lot, and that's the time it takes to validate the blockchain. So Ripple apparently is going to do what they've done. I'd like to know more about it, because all of those are alternatives, and they're addressing, it's just a great time when the legacy players of all these cost things to worry about are creating more opportunity because they can't justify.
Yeah, Ripple is beautiful, because what they're essentially doing is they're saying, let's rebuild Swift from the ground up. How can we essentially, no, don't laugh, because it works. Essentially what they do is they say, banks have to have debt differential. And if I'm a small credit union sending a wire transfer to a big bank in China, it's going to take a really long time for a bunch of reasons. Well, first, it's got to go through JP Morgan, Standard Chartered, the usual intermediary mafia banks. But also, there are, sorry, what did I say? They take like $15, and by the time the wire gets there, I owe money. There's also like, if one bank owes another bank too much money that they're comfortable with, then they just won't process the wire until it gets balanced out. And Ripple and these protocols totally take the need to trust other banks and to trust a central Swift type network. And transactions, like you said, are confirmed virtually instantly. The best part is there's no volatility, because assets on the Ripple network can be based on dollars, euros, pounds, anything. There's no volatility risk. My friend just launched Quantipult launched today, actually, Quantipult Locks. And Quantipult Locks allows you, LOCKS, allows you to, not like bagels and lox. Yeah, because I had a bagel this morning. It was awesome. Locks allows you to essentially lock a Bitcoin price in forever, for as long as you want. So I can send you $10, you can send in $10, and it's just $10. It's always going to be $10, no matter if the Bitcoin price rises and falls, and then at any point you could unlock it. So if I know that I have to pay, I'm making let's just say my salary in Bitcoin, and volatility is something that I don't mind, but I know that if I make $5,000 a month, I have to still pay $2,000 a month. Yeah, right, we're going to pay that kind of New York City rent. If I have to pay $2,000 a month in rent, why take the volatility risk? I'll lock $2,000 in as soon as I get paid, and when it's time to pay my rent, I'll just unlock that, and it'll always be worth $2,000. So you have these awesome new products that are coming out every single day, but unfortunately, where is Locks based out of? Panama City, and they were based out of New York, because it's just, the regulations are too gray and too controlling, and like, it probably won't be legal in New York if they actually launch it. But what they're going to do is like, so I heard someone had a great idea. He's like, well, the BitLicense said that it's not going to get rid of jobs out of New York. So what he's doing is, you have a lot of New York companies have this banner on their website that says "Made in New York." He's going to have a new company called Blocked in New York, and all these companies are just going to block New York access. So if you're living in New York, you can't use any companies. That's what the BitLicense is going to do, because it's easier to just block New Yorkers than to try to comply with them, unfortunately. And we don't want that. We want to comply with them.
Unless you use a web proxy service, right?
Unless you use but even if you allow Tor, this is the worst. If you allow Tor, you have to like tell the regulators. And they're going to say, well, why do you allow Tor? Why do you allow proxies? You should be blocking them.
next guest is really great at telling stories. The other one is really good at giving people a way to do that. So we're going to get them on stage together to talk about the future of publishing and media. Please welcome to the stage Ev Williams and Walter Isaacson, and Matthew Panzarino is going to be our moderator.
Thank you guys for coming, both. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
So, Walter, you have a new book coming out. This is it. It's called The Innovators. I'm holding this. It's contractually obligated that I hold it up like this. It's a book you started before you started writing about Steve Jobs, correct?
Yeah, I started work on this book about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was doing digital media at Time Inc. And I was surprised. I couldn't figure out how did the personal computer and the original mainframe computers start? Who came up with the logical circuit notions? And then how did the internet develop? And I thought, well, it'd be interesting to start gathering string of all the people I was working with, you know, from Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, who did the internet protocols, and obviously Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, who helped with the personal computer. I started doing oral histories and interviews with all of them. I put it aside when I ended up writing a book about Steve Jobs, but that just made me a little bit more interested in going back to look at the intersection of the internet and the personal computer.
Good. I mean, I've read the book. I finished it last night, actually, because I couldn't stop, but I really enjoyed it. So that aspect of it, I really liked the way that you took us through, you know, kind of, you started at Ada Lovelace, right? You start way back.
You know, Ada Lovelace is an interesting and little-known character, Lord Byron's only legitimate child. Lady Byron was not particularly fond of Lord Byron when Ada was growing up, for reasons you romantic poets may know. But so she had Ada tutored only in mathematics, as if that were going to be an antidote for her becoming a romantic poet or something. So she ends up with as somebody who loves both poetry and mathematics and technology. And so she's the symbol, as Steve Jobs was, of somebody who can connect the humanities to technology. Her father was a Luddite, meaning he actually was a follower of Ned Ludd. They were smashing the looms in England. But Ada loved how the punch cards taught the looms to do these beautiful patterns. And she said, oh, we could do that with calculating machines and do any sort of logical sequencing, not just of numbers, but of music, of words. So she comes up with the notion of a computer, and I figured I wanted to start with her.
Right, and then thematically it pulls through, even near the end with the personal computer, a lot of those original concepts that she, you know, kind of laid out, they're still ringing true. You know,
well, she is the spiritual person who brings us Ev Williams, you know.
right, exactly. And Ev's in the book too, right? He's
for early on for a blogger, because one of the interesting things that happens when the web is created in the early 90s is those of us who were in the media business back then, I was there, we started pouring old wine into new bottles. It really sucked. I mean, it was, you know, we were taking a magazine and trying to make it a website. And so it was not what the internet was invented to do. But Ev was able to create Blogger, which was this very simple way to bring a whole lot of people into the ability to publish, but then also the ability to form communities around what was being published. So to me, Blogger, which was the first of Ev's three, I mean, you've had a trifecta, or a hat trick, I guess you'd say, here in the Pacific Northwest. You know, that was something that helps take the web and makes it more into a open and community thing, as opposed to something that publishing houses would pour their magazines into.
And, you know, Isaacson, or Walter's book, I should say Isaacson's book, Walter's book.
You can call me Walter.
I'll call you Walter for now. In his book, you know, he mentions, you know, Justin Hall and kind of the first prototypical blogger, and then, you know, your creation of Blogger as a tool. And he doesn't use this analogy specifically, and I'll probably get, you know, crap over it, but it seems to me like it's analogous to the printing press, you know, where you have somebody in a castle who can afford to pay a bunch of scribes to transcribe the King James Bible and all that, and then the printing press comes along and you can, you know, anybody can print protest flyers in their basement or whatever, at some point once it gets, you know, common enough. So Blogger essentially took the architectural knowledge out of the equation, right? And just focused on people with things to say.
Yeah, but I think Walter makes a good point. I think the internet itself, or the web, was really the printing press, but it was the way I always describe blogging it was finding one of the web's native forms. And it was people were publishing, obviously people had home pages and people putting magazines and newspapers. But the blog was this native form that only made sense on the web, and it took advantage of the fact that there was you could publish many times a day. There was no limit. You could publish a paragraph or something very long. You could interact with the readers of the blog, and anyone could do it. And then suddenly you had this new form that took advantage of basically the network, which was there for a few years before we really realized, oh, what do we do with this thing?
If I could add, one of the things it does is it makes it simple. And that is, to me, one of the themes of digital success. As you walk the alley here and watch people doing things, those who can make something much simpler. And it starts with the video game when Al Alcorn and Nolan Bushnell take Space Wars, which is this wonderful video game that was created at MIT, and says, we're going to make it simple. Just insert quarter, avoid Klingon. That's how simple it will be, as opposed to making it complex. And Steve Jobs was working the night shift, and Woz was coming to visit him, and they do Breakout and other things. And you watch every step of the way, whether it's the iPod, where Steve is fanatic about keeping it simple, or Blogger, where suddenly in 1994, I think, or 3? 99, but okay, yeah, 99, when suddenly you could just, something could strike you, it just insert words in box, push button.
I think that's a huge deal. I didn't understand it at the time, but the way I think about all technology now is if you're creating something, your goal is to fulfill some human desire more easily, more conveniently. And it's embarrassing at the time that I didn't realize it, because we required you to have your own web host for the first year of Blogger. Mm-hmm. We had no hosting at all, and you had to go set up. And of course, as soon as we removed that barrier, it started to really, really explode. But that process of taking out steps, I think, is really the key thing. Thought to typing in box to publish completely changed the whole landscape of blogging.
So you guys did an experiment together with this book, and I know you did it over a few sites, but you mentioned in the afterword that Medium was one of the more successful, and you took sections of the book that may have involved several different people or viewpoints and published them publicly and let those people commentate on them or mark them up in line, sort of like a proofreading experiment, right? How did that come about?
Yeah, and even crowdsourcing. One night I was writing the part about the real creation of ARPANET, where Steve Crocker, in other words, were doing the request for comments for the original ARPANET that really sort of is a foundation for what becomes the internet. And it was there so that researchers could collaborate. They could put stuff up and get comments from everybody else. And I said, well, hey, why don't I try to see how that worked on the internet today? Because obviously I'd been involved editing Wikipedia, doing the type of things where you, as a just natural citizen of the web, you're doing things. I was saying, well, what if you tried it with a book? So in the early days of the internet, we had the BBSs and the news groups and the bulletin board systems and the Usenet. And I said, how would those tools compare to the tools we have today? And so I was looking for places where I could publish a chapter or just put a draft of a chapter up and let people say, no, here's something interesting, or I was there, or here's a photograph, or you should tell the story this way. And I did it on maybe 7 or 8 places. I don't want to name the ones that weren't as good, but without blowing smoke, but it's why he's here. When I put it on Medium, it has a collaborative tool so people can just put inline comments. And suddenly, some people from the old days, like Stuart Brand, were saying, no, we didn't drop acid on the first of these things. It was actually later that night. Okay, let me get that one right. But Dan Bricklin, who was an old friend of yours, said, here's how we did VisiCalc and why VisiCalc was an important bridge to creating application software. He gave me all the stuff. So I started incorporating that in, and it's still, if I may say so, in the rudimentary stages. I would love it for those of us who write books in the future to be able to say, let's crowdsource them, let's have them curated so I can decide, as I can on Medium, well, that was kind of a wacky thing, but, this is kind of interesting. And let's find a way to divvy up the royalties and the payment systems, have an easy payment system so that people together can create a book, maybe with an author acting as a curator, not as a controlling the whole thing, and then say, okay, we've gotten this book, put up your original code for the Darwin kernel that you put in the operating system, or for GNU Linux, show me the pictures, show me the code. All of that could be put into a collaborative space with an author sort of trying to keep the narrative going, but giving all this material that was crowdsourced, and then having a way to, which Ted Nelson, when he does hypertext in the early days, and even Tim Berners-Lee, when he creates the web in the early 90s, wanted to have systems where everybody could collaborate, but you could sort of allocate the resources to those who had collaborated.
I mean, so do you see Medium as something that you've been making a transition a little bit in, kind of paying people to create content for you, which takes you away from the whole, pure platform approach. And then you've also been hosting publications that are, kind of creating these collections of authors that are writing on a central theme. So how do you see the future of Medium as a collaboration tool that can enable authors to do things like what Walter's been done?
Well, collaboration has been a theme of Medium since the beginning. And from a very broad perspective, our goal is to say, everyone's sharing their ideas and stories all over the web, and that's awesome. How can we make the whole greater than the sum of the parts by bringing people together and let them build off of each other? So the notes feature that Walter mentioned was one mechanism that we created to do that. And it occurred to us early on that the internet has been great historically at bringing people together to create things that are better than what they could do on their own. And you see awesome examples of this, both commercially and non-commercially, especially non-commercially with Wikipedia and open source software. But other types of, so this type of content that we deal in, it's awesome that someone can create a blog like you did and be their own writer, editor, promoter, marketer, designer. But it seems like we can get more done if we take advantage of specialization and collaboration. So it was really something we talked about a lot in the early days of Mediums. How can we bring people together just to help each other create something better than they can on their own? And that's a theme we're continuing to iterate on. And as a whole, Medium is, we look at it very much as a platform, and our publishing efforts are there to help spur that platform along.
The internet developed with two strands. One was the publishing strand. You can put anything you want up if you're a blogger like you or whatever. And the other is the community strand, which was like The Well and others even before the web was around, gathered people into community. Those have had somewhat of a tension. In fact, I think I even quote you when you were originally doing Blogger. You thought of it as a publishing platform, but then it becomes a community platform. And I think joining the publishing power of the web with the community power of the internet, that forming of online, virtual communities, that's where the power lies in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And that's clearly what Twitter is. I mean, I came to Twitter with very much an information spreading mindset, and is in the time of Jack, I think originally was looking at more as people keeping in touch with each other, and that bloomed into something that's very powerful when you put them together. And I think that's, if you look at any major platform today, it obviously combines those elements. With Blogger, in fact, we didn't have comments in Blogger for a long time because, who wants to talk to people? Right. I don't want to talk to people on the internet. I just want to see their thoughts. But it turns out people like to talk to each other.
And one of the central themes of the book, as I understand it, just in my limited understanding, having finished it last night and not thought about it a whole lot, is that this myth of the sort of Silicon Valley creator myth, right? You dissect it kind of over and over as each of these major inventions that push the personal computer or the web forward. And break it apart to show that there are, in fact, many ideas, many collaborators kind of scooping those ideas together with a sieve and kind of coming up with the ones that will work to push this thing forward. So it kind of breaks apart that sole proprietorship, brilliant moment, which I think is one of those things where, like, for instance, Twitter, there's this constant talk about, who invented what and how many things, and the truth is really that a lot of people did over a certain period of time.
Those of us who are biographers know that we have a dirty little secret, which is that we distort history. We make it seem like there's some guy in a garret or garage who comes up with a light bulb moment, and, it's Edison or Morse or, Bell or somebody, when in fact most of the innovations and disruptions of the digital age were done collaboratively by teams. That's why we don't, quote, know who invented the computer, because there were 4 or 5 teams working on it, and these were collaborative efforts. Likewise with the internet. There's, leaving aside the Al Gore jokes, there's no, person who can say, I invented the internet. Nick Bilton, who I think may be here, I don't know whether you liked it, but in the Twitter book, there was that exchange of nobody invented Twitter. Twitter existed and it was a team. When one, I won't go into the names, but one of the founders, your co-founders saying, I invented it, the answer is no. So I wanted to, years and years ago, when another century, when I was just coming out of college, I wrote a book with a friend called The Wise Men. It was about the collaboration of 6 friends who created American foreign policy during the Cold War. I wanted to get back to that because collaboration is the key to creativity. Innovation is a team sport, and we biographers have to get away from saying, here's the lone inventor.
Yeah. I see the internet, and going back to blogging for a minute, it was very clearly just a series of incremental steps. I mean, I certainly didn't invent blogging. There's Dave Weiner and Justin Hall, and there are these little things that we stumble upon that become very, very common, and they just become part of the fabric, but they occur to most people working on the internet, I think, at the same time, because it's the next adjacent thing to what we're all used to.
And I mean, you're making our jobs harder because it's really much easier in a headline to say so-and-so created such and such.
When I was a magazine editor, which I once was, you always want to know, who do I put on the cover? Mark Andreessen, Andy Grove, Jeff Bezos. We put people on the cover. The age of the internet is not as geared to putting people on the cover or putting them on the Pantheon and saying this was the one person. But I think it's actually more interesting to try to show, for example, on the computer, if you're saying what was really the first computer, you can have a historical argument. And if you're a romantic who believes in the lone inventor, you talk about this guy, Vincent Atanasoff, who was in Iowa State, and in the basement of the physics building there, creates an electronic circuit that can do some of what a computer can do. He never could get his computer really working. He couldn't get the punch card burner to work. He gets drafted into the Navy, or goes into the Navy, and nobody knows what this machine is, and they throw it away. Whereas at the same time, there's a whole team at the University of Pennsylvania, led by, Presper Eckert and John Mauchly, with these 6 women who were doing, women mathematicians doing the programming, about 20 engineers, people know how to get grease under their fingernails, and they build ENIAC, and it works. So it's sort of a sign that the lone inventor can't do it in the digital age. You need that team.
And sometimes when you have a team, it doesn't work either.
Right. And if you have a team without a visionary, vision without execution is just hallucination. Yeah. But if you have a lot of execution, but you don't have a visionary driving it, then it becomes barren. But whether you look at the transistor, which is done at Bell Labs with this great group, driven by 2 or 3 visionaries, Shockley, Bardeen, and Bratton, or the original computer driven by, Mauchly, Eckert, the 6 women programmers, you have to have that right combination of visionaries and team that can execute.
And timing.
Sorry, go ahead. Anyone?
I was just going to mention timing. If you're a startup trying to bring your thing to market, there's so many things today that you can look back 10 years ago and say, like, oh yeah, that company tried that, but it was too early, or it was poorly executed, or whatever else. So.
Yeah, ripe seeds have to fall on fertile ground.
Right, at the right time, too, when the things are available that you need to actually make it grow. There's one thing, we're almost at time, but there's one thing I saw you mention, which was very interesting, in that you mentioned the concept of an environment or a community convincing itself it's revolutionary by saying it is over and over again. And that just reminded me a lot of current Silicon Valley, that everybody gets up on a stage like this one and says that their product is going to revolutionize X. And do you think that they can self-manifest that by saying it?
Well, the word innovation and the word disruptor, as in this conference, have been so used that they sometimes get drained of their meaning. And there's a wonderful book I tried to read about the scientific revolution, the last time this happened, And there's a wonderful book by Steve Chapin that starts, there was no such thing as a scientific revolution, and this is a book about it. Meaning, it did happen. And he said the way we know it happened is the people there felt they were part of something revolutionary. So yes, if you look at the way things are being changed by the confluence of personal computers, mobile devices, and networks, such as the internet or the web, that has so disrupted things. It's like the combination of the steam engine, mechanical, things like the loom, and the other things that created the Industrial Revolution.
All right, cool. Well, thank you guys very much for coming up here to talk. I appreciate it.
Cool. Good to see you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for today's episode was provided by Stephanie Murphy, Paige Peterson, MK Lords, Tatiana Moroz, Lynn Albrecht, Evie Williams, Walter Isaacson, Matthew Panzarino, Mark Hochstein, and Charlie Shrem. This episode was edited by Adam Levine. Music was provided by Jared Rubens and General Fuzz. Thanks for listening.